Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to Friday Fellowship. I hope that you have had a good week. And now it's the weekend, so let's celebrate. We hope that this time helps you to enter into a time of slowing down and resting. And to begin, let's take a moment to be silent and to bring our focus to God.
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is David Kim. I'm a sophomore at CMC, and I just wanted to welcome you to another Friday Fellowship. I hope midterm season is treating everyone well. I know it's definitely not an easy time, but I'm proud of each and every one of you for having the confidence to push through and give it your all. So, before we get into Reverend Dr. Salvatierra's message tonight, just a couple of announcements. To start off, immediately after our Friday Fellowship tonight, we'll be having our virtual Zoom hangout. We'll be hanging out with some of our kind of CCFers and maybe playing some games, perhaps among us. You'll find all the Zoom links in our Facebook group, our Messenger chat, and Lauren's email announcement. We hope to see you there. For our next announcement, we'll be having another awesome Zoom workout with CCF alum and Pomona Pitzer football coach Matt tomorrow, Saturday, from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Come to get a solid workout in and spend some time with awesome people. Next up, we have our group study session. Yes, this Sunday from 8 to 10 p.m. Especially if you have midterms coming up, feel free to come by for some motivation and fellowship. For our final announcement, Sagrika and Grace will be hosting a baking hangout next Saturday, October 17th at 3 p.m., walking you through on how to make the best vegan pumpkin muffins. If you're interested in joining, please reach out to Sagrika for more information. And with that, we'll now transition into time of meet and greet. Within the chat, please introduce yourself and then comment on what's been keeping you grounded this past week, especially during such a busy time of year. With that, we'll start the timer now.
All right. Well, last week we started our current series on Shalom in the news, and Matt Bush spoke about how to overcome complacency and seek justice for Black lives. It was an awesome talk. If you missed it, you can still catch the recording on the Facebook page right here. Tonight we're going to have our second talk in the series, and then the final talk in the Shalom in the News series will be later this semester. It got bumped back on November 13th. Between tonight and that talk, we're starting a new series, which will be practices for self-quarantines. And we're going to be looking at spiritual practices of prayer and rest and self-care that fit well in the weird, boundaryless, screen-filled lives that we're all living these days. Our first speaker in that series next week will be Christy Garza Robinson, and she'll be sharing about how God cares about our mental health, and so should we. I'm really looking forward to it.
Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Reverend Alexia Salvatierra. Alexia has spoken for us many times before, and we're so grateful to have her join us virtually tonight. She teaches at Fuller Seminary and is the author of the book Faith-Rooted Organizing, Mobilizing the Church in Service to the World. She is an ordained Lutheran pastor and a community organizer. After her talk tonight, we're going to have a time of Q&A, so jot down any questions that you might have for her. Thank you for being with us tonight, Alexia.
So happy to be with you. So let's actually open with a moment of prayer. And then, Chris, if you can put up my first slide, that would be great. Holy Lord, we long to serve you in every way that you ask us to serve. Politics can be so confusing and so anguishing, Lord, but we know that there is nothing to fear because you are with us. So we would ask you to guide us in this time together tonight. I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing to you, our Lord and our Redeemer. In the holy name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So the title for the presentation tonight is Shalom and the Ballot Box. And I think the first question we have to ask is, what do they have to do with each other? Because Christians throughout history have had a stream, just a very particular stream, but it's always been there since the beginning, of Christians that say, let's not have anything to do with the world. Let's not have anything to do with the public arena or the political arena. Let's just separate ourselves and live a holy life together and be an example. So I think it's always a really good question that why should Christians get engaged in the political process? So let's go to the next slide. So the first line that I want you to read, Reverend Jonathan Brooks, when he gives a workshop on this subject, he always starts by reading this line. Seek the peace and prosperity of your family, because if it prospers, the community will prosper. And everybody nods and says, yes, of course, that's obvious. That's what we really need to do. We need to focus on our families, and then the community will prosper automatically. But then Jonathan Brooks reveals that that's not actually what the scripture says. So let's take the next line, which is actually Jeremiah 29:7, says, seek the peace and prosperity, which is the shalom, of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So they were exiles. The Babylonians were their enemies. And yet still, God is saying, actively seek the shalom of the city in every way that is available to you, including prayer, but going beyond prayer, because there's more that you can do to seek the shalom than only pray. So next line. It's really how we seek the shalom of the city is a question of stewardship. What gifts do we have? Whatever gifts we've been given are the gifts that we have to use to glorify God and to care for his people. So I believe that we have been given the gifts of democracy. When I was young, I wasn't sure that we had a functioning democracy in this country. If we really think of democracy as a place where everyone has voice, where everyone's vote matters, where everyone's voice matters, where everyone is part of the process of making public decisions. I didn't think that was true. And then I went to the Philippines under the dictator Ferdinand Marcos, and I said, woo, we do have a democracy in the United States. It's not perfect, but it functions, and it is such a gift. And go to the next line. And the truth is, when God gives us a gift and we don't use it, God is not pleased. Luke 19:11-26 is the parable of the talents, where God gives one man 10 talents and one man 5 talents and one man 1 talent. And then he goes away, and then he comes back to see what they've done with their talents. And the one with 10 talents has invested it. He's risked it, but he's invested it. He's produced 10 more talents. And God says, good and faithful servant. And the 5 talent person, same thing, invest 5 talents. But the 1 talent person says, I was scared because I know you are a whole hard and cold master. And so I hid it. I buried it in the ground. I put it in a napkin so that I wouldn't lose it. And God is not pleased. So I think we really need to recognize that when we have these incredible gifts of democracy, that we have them for a reason. When people all over the world would want them, when in the civil rights movement people died to get the vote, that that being able to be part of the decisions that our society makes is a great gift. It's also a responsibility, because if people don't participate, democracy doesn't work. So go to the next slide. Next slide, please. And actually, you could go back for 1 minute. I realized I didn't read the bottom line, which is the gifts of democracy are voice, vote, and influence. Even if you can't vote, if you're here as an international student, you still have voice. Everybody who's part of our society has voice. And you still have the opportunity to be an influence. You can be a good and holy influence on our leaders. We call them our representatives because they represent us. And so if we don't tell them what we want, and we're mad at what they do, we have nothing to say because we haven't told them what we want. So that's where the influence piece comes in. Now you can go to the next slide. So we're called to bring shalom, and we're called to do it in every way that we can, which means that the tools of the ballot box are tools that we need to use. But now we run into the confusion. What issues do we support? It's very hard to sort through between the different sides yelling at each other. What is true? How do we know what will produce shalom in our communities? So I've been praying and meditating on this quite a bit about how I want to talk about this. And I came upon 2 Corinthians 2:15. For we are to God the pleasing aroma of Christ among those who have been saved and those who are perishing. So there is an aroma to Christ. We know when someone smells like Christ, right? What smells like Jesus? Well, Jesus smells like love, right? Generous, sacrificial love for the whole world, even including sinners, including his enemies, right? That when something smells like that kind of love, that's something that we should, we still have to examine critically, but that's something we should go towards, right? And if it doesn't smell like that, if it doesn't smell generous, if it doesn't smell sacrificial, if it doesn't smell loving for the whole world, including enemies, then we should watch out because it doesn't smell like Jesus. And we see underneath a statement about the Spirit, right? Which is the Spirit of Jesus, because it's the Trinity. That the fruit of the Spirit is, and I want you to pay attention, because when you're looking at what issues or what candidates to support, you really need to look at this list. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility, and self-control. Galatians 5:22-23. So what issues and what politicians, what leaders smell like that? That's something that maybe you want to trust. And if they don't smell like that, maybe not so much. So let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to give you a little case study to help us make this practical. I've been working for 40 years with our broken immigration system. We have a system that most people know is ineffective. And if you get a step closer, it's illogical and inhumane. It's a system that just doesn't work. We could do much better. Canada has a much better system than we do. And I'm not going to go into a lot about the system. I'm just going to say that this administration that we have right now, since they came in 2016, have made 400 changes in our immigration policy. And all of them are regulatory changes. None of them came through Congress. They weren't laws that anybody voted on. They were just decisions made by this administration. And they're all restrictive. So you may be aware, for example, of the decision to get rid of DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, for young people who are brought here as children. And many of whom you may know, who may be studying with you, that they've had a certain level of protection and they don't have it anymore under this administration, although there's still a fight going on about whether the courts in some way are going to save them. But, I'm particularly concerned not only about migrants, but I'm concerned about refugees. Refugees are people who, and this is the definition I'm going to give you, is a definition that goes back to 1948, to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights after World War II. And our country was one of the leaders in forming this Universal Declaration. And in the Declaration, it calls on every country that signs to welcome refugees. And refugees are people who are fleeing violent persecution in their country of origin as a result of their race, their religion, their political opinion, their country of origin, or their ethnicity, or their membership in a specific group. So if they ask for that status from a refugee center in a third country, and we accept them, we call them refugees. And if they ask for that status at the border, we call them asylum seekers. But it's the exact same status. So I want to give you just a couple of the changes that have happened to people who are running for their lives, who are refugees and asylum seekers in the last 4 years. So one of the changes has been that asylum seekers now have to request asylum in any country they pass through, or they cannot request it at the U.S. border. And that is even being followed when people have gone through countries which are dangerous. The Central American Northern Triangle are some of the most dangerous countries in the world. And but our government is expecting people who come through those countries to apply for asylum from those countries, which just doesn't make any sense at all. Or they have to apply in Mexico, but Mexico is notorious not only for not having much of an asylum program, but for corrupt authorities actually working with some of the organized crime groups that are taking over parts of Central America and threatening the people's lives. So it's really just a way of stopping people from asking for asylum. It's really not rational. Another one is that a number of asylum seekers who got there before that regulation have to await their cases in Mexico, even though they may be in danger in Mexico and they may not be able to get an attorney or have a physical hearing. So those are some of the changes to the asylum system, which I think don't smell like Jesus. They really don't smell like that inclusive, generous love that characterizes Jesus. So a couple more. There have been 48 changes since COVID, which is not surprising. All over the world, people have sealed their borders around COVID. But in most countries that have sealed their borders, there's a termination date to the sealing so that it will be, reconsidered. There's no termination dates in our sealing of the border. And part of what that means, let me just bring it home. There was a 12-year-old and 8-year-old who arrived at our border about a few weeks ago. This was written up in the LA Times, a 12-year-old boy and his 8-year-old sister. And the boy had a video showing his father was killed in front of him by one of these organized crime leaders. And the organized crime leader in the video tells the little boy, "We're coming for you and your sister next." So he ran. He has relatives in the United States. So he ran and asked for asylum at the border. And they were kept 48 hours. They were given a COVID test, which they were negative, but they were not allowed to show the video to anybody or have a hearing, and they were just deported. And now they're with an uncle, and he's planning to run, and we don't know what's going to happen to them. So again, keep thinking of the aroma of Jesus. What would Jesus do? Then we had a ceiling in refugees. The amount of refugees we allowed from anywhere in the world in 2019 was 18,000. In comparison to every year since 1980, under Republican and Democratic administrations, we've allowed between 60,000 and 100,000. So all the countries of the world sort of divide up how many refugees they'll take. So we don't take very many anymore. And we used to take a lot more. And people that I know at international refugee work just don't know what to do with all the refugees that no one is taking because of the refugees that we are now not taking. So let's go to the next slide. So how do we recognize a godly leader? What does a godly leader look like, right? And it's not just whether someone says they're a Christian, because people can say they're a Christian and it could be nothing, right? So let's make this slide bigger so we can read it together. This is a prayer for the king, who was the government at the time. And so as we see this prayer, we can see what a godly leader is like and what a godly leader does, like the kind of person we might want to vote for. So it says here, give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to a king's son. May he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May the mountains yield prosperity for the people and the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor. For he delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. He has pity on the weak and the needy, and saves the lives of the needy. From oppression and violence, he redeems their life, and precious is their blood in his sight. That last line to me is the line that really says what a godly leader is like. Whether that's a leader as a mayor, whether that's a leader who's a president, whether that's a leader who's a senator, whoever they are, that a godly leader is a leader who treats every human being as precious in their personal interactions, in the policies that they advocate for, that those are the kinds of leaders that we want to support, whatever political party they belong to. That's what a godly leader is. And that's what we call our leaders to be, that we call our leaders to live up to this standard because this is God's standard. So let's go to the last slide. So obviously, we are in the most bitter partisan divide that I think our country has ever seen. And so it's very important to know how to have constructive dialogue with people that are on the other side, whatever side we're on. So I wanted to just go through, and Christina Cleveland, Brenda Salter McNeil are both people who've done a lot of writing about this, and I drew from their writing if you're interested in reading more about it. But the first thing, there's really 4 things that you need to remember if you want to have a constructive dialogue with someone who doesn't agree with you. The first one is a position of humility and genuine care for the other. People don't learn from other people who are yelling at them, even if they're right. They learn from people who they trust to love them. So you really have to love the person you're talking to if you're going to have a constructive dialogue about differences. You know, Philippians 2 talks about the humility of Christ, and that's really needs to be our example for us. Secondly, don't start with where you disagree. Start with your common sacred ground. Start with what you agree on. And that may be hard because we all want to fight right now, but we're not going to get anywhere that way. We have to start with our common sacred ground and pray together. Then the third one is you really have to get underneath your positions. How did you come to the point where you had that position? What are the experiences and relationships that form each of your position? Because we can relate to each other's experiences, and that gives us a real basis for conversation. And lastly, breathe. We get physiologically flooded right now with anything to do with politics, and that's always sometimes we just want to run away. But when you get flooded, you have to stop and you breathe. Just be clear that everyone is easily flooded right now, and be compassionate toward yourself and other people. You can take a little prayer break and just stop and breathe, because we really live in 2 different universes right now. Like, many people don't know the information I was giving about refugees. They just don't even know it. So you can be mad at people for what they don't know. We just live in 2 different universes with 2 different sets of information. So in addition to Christina Cleveland and Brenda Salter McNeil, I'm part of something called the Ally Tour, which is women of color and white women who are all Christian leaders who are having conversations about some of these issues. So if you can look it up on the net, the Ally Tour, if you're interested in listening to us. So, and there's also an organization called Braver Angels, which is working very hard to bring moderates from both sides together. So I just want to give you those resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexia. We really appreciate you addressing these things. And I know I have questions for you. I hope that those of us who are watching may also have questions. What we're going to do right now is we're going to give our sort of spirits a chance to respond to this message, and thinking both about like what this is stirring in us, but also what questions we may have for Alexia. She's going to be available after this reflection song to answer those questions. So we're going to have we have another recording provided to us by our friend Eric Lige. And as he's singing, it's a beautiful song. As he's singing, let's go ahead and post questions in the comments that you would like Alexia to answer. Maybe bring in your own concerns about voting or about bringing your political engagement and your faith together, whatever those might be. And then when the song is done, we'll do that Q&A together.
God of justice, love and mercy, pour your wisdom on our souls. By your all-sustaining power, keep our spirits strong and whole. Lift our eyes to see your vision of a world in urgent need. Grant us courage then to follow, bringing comfort with each deed. God of justice, love and mercy, with compassion let us care. As we come in humble weakness, may your strength be ours to share. Press our hearts to know the struggle of the ones we cannot see. Brothers, sisters, all who suffer, may God's kindness set them free. God of justice, love and mercy, send us out and make us bold as we strive for your high calling. Let our hands your mercies hold. You have blessed us with abundance, gifts to share with those in need. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, may we follow as you lead. The Bible book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 17. It says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the orphans, and plead the case of the widow. God shows us in Micah 6:8. He shows us humans what is good. And so what does God require of us? It is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring Dr. Salvatierra back on here with me. Hi, Alexia. And we have some questions here. So why don't we start with this question from Sigrika. I'm going to post it. I'll see if it will fit on here. Yes. How do we balance this idea of understanding both sides and showing compassion and understanding to all people with our own views of radical justice? For example, how do we show compassion and understanding to those who don't support immigration reform?
See, that's what I feel like one of the spiritual sicknesses of our society is that we don't know how to disagree with people and love them. So we think we have two choices. We either disagree with people or we love them. But in fact, to love somebody and to share with them the depth of your passion is like witnessing about your faith to an unbeliever. What? Of course, you share the depth of your own passion, but you share your depth of passion in a way that pays attention to who they are and cares for them. So when we apply it to evangelism, we say, of course, look at that. Why would we think of these things as opposite? But when we think of the political realm, they have become so highly charged that they feel opposite, but they're not. I'm incredibly passionate about immigration reform. And there are lots of people who just don't know what's happening or don't care. And so, I share my passion with them, but I share it in a way that is mutual, that is respectful, that starts with our common ground, because otherwise, what is going to be the result, right? It doesn't do anybody any good just to alienate somebody. It doesn't do your cause any good. You haven't made a stand for your cause by alienating another person that you could have educated, right?
That's great. I think one of the things that a lot of our students will feel the tension with is this question of how to balance that like experience of engaging with people of different viewpoints, especially since sometimes those viewpoints are very can be painful or difficult to listen to. And Sigrika included a follow-up comment here to her previous one. She says, on a similar note, do you think it is necessary to consume information from a variety of sources, even if we feel that the views from them are harmful? If so, do you have recommendations on how to go about this?
So let me just first say that I do believe it's important to be informed about things that are on the ballot in particular right now, because we're heading towards an election. And, you can read, when you get your little ballot folder, you can read both sides and their arguments, right? That's one thing. It's another thing to be on social media 24/7. Being on social media 24/7 isn't healthy at this point, because there's so much hatred going on both sides. We are a very graceless society. There's no grace anywhere, and grace transforms people. So I would say, look for facts, right? Look for people that smell like Jesus, listen to them. When you are looking at a particular initiative and trying to decide what to support, look at what different people have to say about it. Like I said, it actually comes. There's voter guides from a variety of different organizations. You can look at this voter guide, that voter guide, and compare them, right? When you're trying to make a decision. But we spend a lot of time listening to things that we don't have any role in. We just get mad and mad and mad, and it's bad for us biologically, and it doesn't make us more effective at creating shalom. And so really watch our addiction to social media. It's not helpful.
Thank you for saying that. I know I feel that a lot. I heard a new term recently, doom scrolling. I don't know if you've heard this term before, but just scrolling through the news, reading the one terrible thing after another. As far as digging in and trying to understand an issue, I ran into a problem with this myself as I was thinking about how to vote. And this is California specific, but there was Proposition 25, which was around bail reform. And at first, it looked great. The law was it was saying to eliminate the cash bail system in California, and it has all these supporters for it, including LA Times and Democratic Party and other folks. But then I saw that Clue, which is an organization, are you still with Clue, or you used to work with Clue?
No, many years ago I used to be.
Okay. And they were against it because they were saying that the algorithm that was going to be used in place of bail was likely to be just as damaging or prejudiced. And so I'm wondering, when it comes to specific issues like this that really get into the weeds, if you have any suggestions as like a voter, how do we navigate those kinds of issues?
Well, it helps to have, when you were talking earlier about a range of sources, is, you have 3 or 4 sources that to be relatively fair, that you don't think are necessarily just going to repeat the same thing, right? Some might be a little bit this way, some might be a little that way. I always look for people who are on the front lines, right, doing the work. Like if I'm going to look at what to understand about refugees, I'm going to look at World Relief, because they're actually doing the work. They're actually accompanying refugees day by day. And so if they say this policy is good for refugees, well, that means a lot to me, right? So you have to decide sort of a range of sources that you would trust. And then you have to think for yourselves. There's no substitute for critical thinking and prayer, right? And you have to do the best you can, and you have to know that in the end, God is in charge. So a lot of the anxiety that we walk around with, again, is not productive. It's not productive.
Lorraine asked this question. Do you have suggestions for us in the next few weeks before the election for how we can engage politically other than voting?
Well, we think that, there's a couple. One is that it's very important. There's a lot of efforts going on to get out the vote. This is one of the most consequential elections of our time. And so it's very important for young people, particularly, to vote. And so getting people information about how to vote, because there's a lot of confusion right now about their polling places, is helping give them the option of being a faithful citizen. So that's very important, is getting people to actually vote if you possibly can. You can do vote parties, get out the vote parties. You can, I think that we also we think this is going to be a violent election. Most of us right now. The police are worried about it. Everybody on both sides is worried about it. We think that, if President Trump wins, that the left and the center left, the Democrats, are going to call voter suppression. And if Joe Biden wins, that the right and the center right are going to call voter fraud. And so the people on the extremes of both are going to war in the street. We hope that won't happen, but we think that will happen. And so we're trying to do a couple of things. We're trying to, first of all, just get people to be in prayer about it the night before the election, to do a prayer vigil, and then to do a prayer vigil the actual night of the election, where we think it will be most dangerous, like 8 p.m. to midnight, that we're going to be asking people to do that. So people are pulling together a flyer and we can get it around. But, we're going to ask people to pray wherever you are, and then to go on social media, and pray with a pray for peace sign, and share it so that it continues to multiply and go viral. Because if we get enough people praying, it will help. There are certain places where Christians are going to go out and stand, actually, as Christian peacemakers between the warring sides and pray for them. But right now, we don't expect that to happen in California. Much more likely in Michigan, much more likely in North Carolina. So, there's not so much of a role for people here to do that. But definitely getting people out to vote so that they do exercise faithful citizenship. And then also praying and being part of a prayer vigil the night before and the night of the election is really important.
Thank you for saying that. That was actually a question that I had about the aftermath of this election. Really quickly off of that, are there any sources that our folks in our ministry can be looking to for guidance during that period of time? Like you mentioned people posting things on Facebook. Do you have any recommended people to follow?
Some people who've been working a lot on this are Faith in Public Life. They're a national group. Also Sojourners and Faith in Public Life are both working hard on this. Sojourners has a project called Lawyers and Callers, which is sending lawyers and pastors out to the polls to make sure that people can vote. But they also are working on a larger guide, which I don't think is out yet. But Faith in Public Life has been doing a lot of work around this, how to prepare for this election.
Great, thank you. One more question here. This is from Sarah, and this has to do with what you were talking about with the asylum and refugees. She writes, what are some of the factors that can impact whether someone receives asylum refugee status? Are there actions that students can take to support asylum seekers?
So this is the first time in my life working with this administration where, as long as they are in power, there has been nothing that we can do. The only time that we were able to stop them, other than the courts, sometimes the courts have been able to stop them, although there's been a very concerted effort to replace judges. We have a number of new judges in the LA area that aren't immigration judges, but they're doing immigration. Anyhow, so they don't even know what they're doing. But the only time that we were able to make a difference was on the separation of children. And that's because the uprising and the soccer moms all over the country, there was such an uprising from both sides of the partisan divide that they pulled back on it. But they've been really consistent about not listening to the public. So, there's been quieter actions. There's been legislative visits up the wazoo. There's been all the kinds of things we normally do to make our voices heard. But this administration doesn't listen. They don't care about refugees. I hate to say that because, I'm very carefully nonpartisan. But it's not a question of being a Republican or Democrat. There have been, the Bush administration was supportive of refugees. It's a question of this particular administration is violently against refugees.
Wow. Well, maybe that brings me to one last question that I wanted to ask you, which is looking ahead to obviously, it's very hard to look past this current election because it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
But once we are past it, how can we be continuing to vote in ways and use our political influence and voices in ways that will continue the kinds of reforms that you see that need to happen right now? Because like you mentioned, there've already been a lot of there's been a lot of work put in and judges put in and other things to try to cement the current anti-immigrant reform. So what can we be doing long term?
Well, there's going to be a lot of work to do if the administration changes. There's going to be a huge amount of work to do, and the squeaky wheel will get the grease. And I think Christians will be very important in lifting up refugees because the average person doesn't care, but we care about every person. Jesus died for every person, so we care about that 12-year-old boy and his 8-year-old sister, right? Even if they're not Americans. So our voices for refugees are going to be critically important because other people will be focusing on other things. Now, if this administration wins, we really have to think deeply about, what does it look like for us to serve Christ in ways that may put us in direct conflict with the administration. When I was in the Philippines and we were dealing with the dictatorship, it was very dangerous, but the movement got stronger because we had to, because we had to deal with a situation that was dangerous for everybody, but for the most vulnerable most of all. So we'll see what happens. Could go either way.
Well, thank you so much. I know it means a lot to me, Alexia, to hear your voice and your wisdom in what has been just a really overwhelming and trying season. And we really
I'm
appreciate
sorry,
your
Chris.
words.
There was one more thing I wanted
yes,
to add,
please.
which is that civic participation starts locally. Find out what's happening on your campus that has to do with justice. You students have a voice on their campus. There are groups that are concerned about different things, and when Christian groups come alongside, it's a great testimony, and it's very effective, and it's a way to learn how to be part of a change process. So look at what's happening at your university. Are people doing Get Out the Vote? Can you encourage them to do it? Look at what's happening in your city. You can get involved in a city level. It's much less partisan in a city level. Even if people wear Republican or Democratic or Green or Liberty, whatever, Libertarian, they wear labels, but they don't care because they're all about fixing the streets and making sure people have health care locally. And so, getting involved locally is a way to be a faithful citizen too. It's not just all about national politics.
That's a good word. That would be something if all the people showing up at the city council meetings weren't just the retired folks, but were also the college students, right?
Yeah, it would change things. Yeah. And it's also just a place that you learn so that then when you're going to deal with things on a bigger scale, you begin to understand how they operate. You begin to be able to read between the lines.
That's fantastic. Well, we're so grateful to you for making this time. I know this has been a very, very busy season for you, and you've had a lot on your plate, and we really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll be seeing you around. Thank you, Alexia.
Okay, blessings. Thank you.
Bye. All right, we're going to bring David on here to close us out. So thanks, David.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you to Reverend Dr. Salvatierra for her empowering message tonight. Thank you all so much for coming to tonight's Friday Fellowship. Feel free to stick around for tonight's hangout using the Zoom link in the Facebook group, and of course, be on the lookout for other fun hangouts in the coming week. Thank you so much again. I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see all of you soon. Bye.